Hey everybody, it's Ron, and today I'm going to start a new series called Star Wars Before Disney. So I'll be covering most of the Dark Horse comics and seeing which ones still hold up. The first series I want to talk about is Boba Fett, Enemy of the Empire, written by John Wagner with art by Ian Gibson. Going back and checking these older issues out has been interesting because most of these books had some top quality talent involved. For those who might not know, John Wagner is the creator of Judge Dredd for 2000 AD, and a legend in the comic book industry. The same could be said for Ian Gibson, who's also a Judge Dredd alumni artist. You might also know his work with Alan Moore on Halo Jones, which was also done for 2000 AD. So right away it's pretty interesting to see two British sci-fi creators interpret the world of Star Wars, and they definitely have a unique take on it. The book starts off on a planet called Marix Minor, and I'll admit that starting the story off in this location threw me off a bit. The inhabitants of this world have an almost medieval Lord of the Rings type of feel, which doesn't seem like Star Wars to me. Since these stories technically don't matter in the real canon anymore, I was a little bit more forgiving of this take on a galaxy far, far away this time, and I'm glad I stuck through because it definitely gets better. In the first couple pages, we're introduced to a pilgrim pleading to be helped and hid from a bounty hunter who has been hunting him. He seems frightened, and with good reason, because the bounty hunter is revealed to be the one and only Boba Fett. The inhabitants agree to let him stay, and that's when it cuts to the Empire. This got me back into the story because now it feels a little more Star Wars to me, seeing the Star Destroyers and reading Vader's introduction. Wagner does a good job with Vader's voice. Anytime I'm reading Vader in a comic, I can't help but hear James Earl Jones' voice, and not every writer's dialogue makes that fit, but Wagner passes that test. Vader never seems out of character, which to me was sometimes a problem in the new canon books. This scene was pretty cool because it's the first time Boba Fett meets with Vader to do his bidding. This story takes place right before A New Hope, according to the old timeline in the beginning of the book. This is interesting to read because we only get a vague sense of their history in The Empire Strikes Back, but in this book, we get to see more of their interaction. Vader ends up hiring Fett to execute a deserter of the Imperial Lightning Battalion named Abul Karda. It's also pretty cool to see two iconic Star Wars villains negotiating payment for a bounty. Vader tells Fett that Karda is in possession of a casket and he wants him to kill Abul and retrieve it for Vader. When asked what the contents of this casket hold, Vader says that it's military papers and nothing of importance, and right away you know Vader is playing a deeper game. Once Boba Fett is on his quest, we meet a group called the Condemned, who were also hired by Vader to shadow Boba Fett on his mission. Their orders are to retrieve the casket from Fett and kill him. Boba Fett ends up on Port Esta and questions the Lightning Battalion on the whereabouts of Abul Karda and why he murdered his superior. Turns out they were fighting creatures called the Ikari, who are basically the Star Wars version of zombies. A precog named Celestrine tells Abul Karda that he'll eventually die by the Ikari, so he released a bioagent on them to wipe them out. He went crazy, killed his superior, and then went missing with the mysterious casket. We're then left with a cliffhanger where Vader hints that when Boba Fett learns what's in the casket, he won't want to part with it, and that's why he must die. So overall, revisiting this first issue was fun. I appreciate reading simple stories like this when it comes to Star Wars, and it works because Vader and Fett are both interesting, iconic characters. The designs are all well done, even though my one minor gripe was that maybe some of the aesthetic doesn't jive with what I imagined Star Wars to look like. Boba Fett killing a Wookiee at the end solidified him as an anti-hero protagonist in this story, and it makes you feel uneasy about who you should be rooting for. So now we have this Condemned crew at Port Esta shadowing Boba Fett as he tries to learn more information about where Abul Karda is. Boba Fett pulls a pretty badass move in the beginning of this issue, and I like seeing the gadgets he has on display here. These two guys he questioned lied to him, and he comes back with a recording before we get a cool fight sequence between the three of them. Seeing Fett in action sparks some fear into the Condemned since their orders from Vader are to kill him. Boba Fett ends up taking jewels off of one of the guys that he was questioning and realizes that it belonged to Karda. There's an interesting line of dialogue here, and Vader implies that the fate of the Empire lies within that casket. It makes me more curious what's actually in it. It's clear that Wagner is setting up a nice mystery thriller here, and we're taken back to Marix Minor, where Karda is hiding out. He finds out that Boba Fett is on his tail, so he panics big time. It's cool to see Boba Fett doing what is essentially detective work, trying to piece together what these jewels have to do with Carta and the precog, and also what Vader wants with them. We also get a reason why Carta has tattoos on his face to hide his identity. There's also a nice cat and mouse element in this issue, but Fett is obviously too smart to be tailed, so he finds out. The photo booth bit is another one of those things that pulls me out of the world a little bit. It doesn't seem like Star Wars, it seems like a real life thing. But it's so minor that it doesn't matter. I dug the Coruscant shout out in this issue, but we know that Carta is on Merrick's Minor, which Boba Fett finally discovers at the end of this issue. It's revealed that the head of the precog, Celestrine, is in the casket, and she's still insisting that Carta is doomed, so we'll see how that plays out. So far, it's a very tight little story, and it's always nice to read more about the underworld crime section of the Star Wars universe. Or at least the old extended universe. The artwork is really well done, and I loved seeing all the different creatures and background characters' otherworldly outfits. Now, like I was saying with issue 2, it was definitely setting up this big action with Boba Fett and raising the stakes for not only his target, Abul Carta, but for Boba Fett himself. So let's jump right into this issue. The hired goons that Darth Vader sent to kill Boba Fett finally catch up to him, and as predicted, they're no match for him. I was actually surprised about how unforgiving Boba Fett was in this sequence, taking them all out one by one. He even kills the dog with a grenade. In my mind, he's killed 2 dogs in this series, the first being a Wookiee in the first issue, and that's completely unforgivable in my eyes. Make no mistake about it, Boba Fett is not a good guy, and John Wagner lets you know that. I think Wagner is the perfect fit to write Boba Fett because he often states that when he was creating Judge Dredd, he wanted him to be like Dirty Harry from the future, and this portrayal of Boba Fett definitely falls in line with that. That being said, as much as I like the artist and his design work in this series, I think Wagner would have benefited from having an artist with a more realistic style on this series. I know he does go on to write Boba Fett again after this, so I'm hoping the art is more gritty next time. I can't help but feel like Ian Gibson would have been more suited for a droid story or something at least more cartoony. Anyway, things move really fast in this issue, and Boba Fett finally catches up to Abul Carta. We find out that Vader wants Celestrine because she can see into the future, and Vader wants that knowledge for the benefit of the Empire. Boba Fett gets the drop on Carta and shows no mercy to him as well. I thought maybe he would last until issue 4, but I like this move because Vader's fleet is on the way back to Coruscant and he takes his Star Destroyer to Merrick's Minor instead, to retrieve the casket from Fett. This leaves us with an exciting end to the issue when Vader approaches Fett for one final confrontation. Now this is interesting because Vader says that Boba Fett might even be a worthy opponent for him. Part of me doubts that Boba Fett would ever get himself into a situation like this knowing Vader's reputation. I personally think he'd be smart enough to know how not to push Vader's buttons and stay off his bad side. But that clearly isn't the story that's being told here. Another interesting thing is that Wagner as a writer has the benefit of knowing that these 2 characters do work together again years later in The Empire Strikes Back. Vader famously tells Boba Fett no disintegrations this time in that film. I wonder if that little throwaway line will play into the final issue of this series. But overall, I'm still enjoying it, and I'll be back tomorrow with the final issue of Boba Fett, Enemy of the Empire, issue 4. It's funny that just yesterday I was talking about the art style being a little too cartoony for my liking on the series, because this final issue actually isn't drawn by Ian Gibson. The duties switch to John Nadeau, who I actually think brings the more gritty feel that I was looking for. I'll never know why they actually decided to switch the artist in the last issue, but if I had to guess, they probably wanted someone who could bring this epic fight between Vader and Boba Fett to life. And that's what we get. This fight was cool because you go in thinking, well, how can Boba Fett ever match up to Darth Vader? And it's pretty clever. He puts up a decent fight by throwing diversions Vader's way and almost gets the upper hand first with a grenade that knocks Vader down, and then with blasters and rocket launchers. Vader ends up slicing his lightsaber right through Boba Fett's speeder, which evens the odds in this fight. I like how they stick with Vader's depiction in the films as being slow and methodical. He ends up overpowering Boba Fett with his relentless lightsaber attacks and his use of the Force. Boba Fett ends up doing a pretty cool move where it looks like he's about to dive off the cliff with the casket, but at the last second he jetpacks back up and fires a shot at Darth Vader. You can only fool Vader for so long, and he ends up back in control again with the power of the Force. Vader should have been smart enough to also move the casket closer to him with the Force, but leaves it behind Boba Fett for some reason. Fett ends up kicking it over the cliff and makes a run for it, stealing Vader's transportation. Vader ends up saving Celestine right before she hits the lava and succeeds. There are a couple cool sequences of Celestine showing Vader what his possible future holds, and it all revolves around his relationship with the Emperor. She warns him how dangerous it is to have her in his possession, and also lets him know that the Emperor will get wind of what happened and ask Vader to give it to him to show his loyalty. Realizing that he can't do that, Vader ends up force choking Celestine before the Emperor can get to it. This was an interesting read that ends up being just as much of a Vader book as it is a Boba Fett book, but I'm not complaining because they play really well off of each other. Last issue, I thought to myself, how could Vader ever work together with Boba Fett after this ordeal? And the answer comes from Celestine when she tells Vader that Boba Fett will be of great importance to the Empire in the future. This is a good setup for Empire Strikes Back. I really enjoyed going back to this old series from Dark Horse, and I'm excited to read more in the future. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching.